Hello and welcome to another episode of the Cultivate Church Planting Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Kelly. And before we get started on this episode, I want to tell you about a couple of events that are coming up that I think you'll really enjoy. First of all, we're going to be having a Cultivate gathering. If you have questions, if you want more information, if you want to get connected, I will be there, Kyle will be there, Terry will be there. We're going to be at Forest Ridge Calvary Chapel, and that's in Austin, Texas. It's Saturday, May 18th. You can register and find out more information at forestridgecalvary.com. Secondly, would you like to be equipped and inspired? Does learning and collaborating amongst fellow Christians sound encouraging and refreshing? Then you should come to the CGN Calvary Chapel International Conference. It's June 23rd to the 26th at Calvary Chapel, Costa Mesa. You can register online at conference.calvarychapel.com. This year's theme is Hope, Suffering, and Glory, studies in 1 Peter. We're going to have 9 speakers addressing topics taken from 1 Peter, June 23rd to 26th. Register at conference.calvarychapel.com. All right, let's get into this week's episode. God bless. Welcome to the Cultivate Church Planting Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Kelly. I'm here with co-host again, Nick Cady.
Hey.
And we are here with Neil Spencer, who is the pastor of a very cool, very great church in Florida. And it's up in the north of Florida. People often say, "Oh, you're in Florida? Do you know Neil? Do you know Brian?"
Yeah.
We live kind of far away,
Yeah,
but Neil is here with us, and he's going to talk about his story of not only being involved in church planting in a church plant, but also some of the issues that surround the transition of one pastor to another, and this just so happens to be a great success story with our church. So glad to have you here with us, Neil. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for the invite.
Yeah.
Great to be with you guys in your home church.
Yeah, we're here in Colorado.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we've actually recorded episodes here in Colorado before, but Neil, great to have you here. And we're here, we're doing kind of CGN Leaders Gathering, and our church in Whitefields here in Longmont is happy to host.
Yeah, you guys are phenomenal hosts with a phenomenal view. Like,
Yeah.
that mountain's amazing.
Never gets
Coming
old.
from Florida, we're used to...
But tell the truth, isn't it too dry here?
Okay, well... so I'm wondering if I have it right now. You know how you can get that headache that comes from elevation sickness?
Yep.
So isn't the cure to drink lots of water? That's what I'm doing.
That's the
That's
cure.
why I'm drinking lots of water. Yeah.
When here's the problem with drinking lots of water. You have to pee a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. No,
Another discussion for another day.
yeah.
For another dude. Yeah.
for another dude. It is kind of dry here, but it's
It is.
beautiful. It's a nice place. Nick has
It's
an
very
awesome church here,
Yeah.
and so glad we could be here.
Yeah, thank you for hosting. It's very beautiful. Yeah, very gracious of you.
So, Neil, let's get started, and maybe just give us a little bit of a summary of the church that you're at,
Okay.
What you're doing, how you got there, and maybe some of the backstory, and then we'll get into some of the details that might be able to help out some of our listeners.
So one of the things that we have in common besides our state of residency is one of the churches that made an investment in our lives, Maranatha Chapel.
Yep.
So I'm from Northwest Florida, born there in 81, Pensacola area. My father, the same, but not the same year, born in 53. Same hospital, though. Long story
Really?
short,
That's
yeah,
cool.
isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
I have 6 children. 3 were born in that same hospital and 3 born in another. But anyway, my father was, 1960s, 1970s, growing up, teenager, rebellious, broken home. And my uncle is known as the Duke of the Gulf Coast. So if you go to Gulf Breeze, Florida, there is a statue of the Duke, Yancey Spencer.
Are you serious?
Yeah, he's the one that popularized the sport of surf in the Gulf Coast area. So he's a well-known surfer. So my father grew up with him. And long story short, Yancey was the first to get saved. And I don't know, I mean, maybe most sports are like this, but in the sport of surf, there's kind of a dark side and a little bit of a lighter side. And I think Yancey always, even before he came to know Jesus, was a little bit more on the lighter side. My dad was not. Dad kind of leaned towards the dark. He was a very hard case to get saved. He got radically saved at a church that you may know of or may not, But it wasn't during that era. It was a church by the name of Brownsville in Pensacola. So in the late 90s, 2000s, the Toronto Blessing made their way there.
Oh, yeah, I heard of it.
But in the 70s, it
Hank
had its
Hanegraaff.
own... All of course, powerful, holy rolling and quacking and
Yeah.
all those things. But in the 70s,
Sounds
they
cool.
had their own version of a Jesus revolution, unattached to Southern California. My father got radically saved during that time frame. And long story short, ended up in an AG Bible college and then a Baptist seminary. And got fired from his first position in a church post-education. Kind of like an old Western, like this church isn't big enough for the both of us, kind of a thing.
Shoot
So
out.
here's what happened. A surf inundates my family. I had another uncle named Tom who was in San Diego a lot, working with a company called Gordon & Smith. So he came to my dad and he said, John, there's all these churches out there. They're pretty normal. They teach the Bible and their music's good. You should go check them out. So my dad
He was
did.
talking about Calvary Chapel.
Talking about Calvary Chapel.
Yep.
He flies out to San Diego, meets a guy named Ray Bentley, who was working under Mike McIntosh at the time.
Horizon Christian Fellowship.
Yeah. And my dad's pretty quick-witted. So my dad went up to Ray after the service. Hey, great message. Hey, this is who I am. I know you don't know me. Is there any way that I could just share my story with you and find out more about you guys? I'm out here all day tomorrow, a Monday. And Ray said, well, Monday's my day off. So my dad went, hey, that's my day off too. We should get coffee. And so it made Ray laugh. And so they ended up spending like 4 hours together that Monday and established a lifelong relationship, lifelong friendship. When Ray passed, Daniel, Ray's son, called me and said, hey, you're the first guy outside of our family, but my mom wants your dad to know. Will your dad do the funeral for Ray?
Yeah.
So they were lifelong friends. And here's what happened with Calvary. Ray, after that 4-hour conversation on a Monday, said, you're pretty much at Calvary. Just go back to your hometown, find some place, teach the Bible. So on the last Sunday with goblins and ghosts in October at a public school, because it was Halloween, my dad hosted his first service with 30 people, 15 of which were family. Second Sunday, 15 people were left, and they weren't the family.
Oh, boy.
So anyway, in 1983, he started. So it became the first, as we understand it, non-emissaried Calvary Chapel. Does that make sense? In the state of Florida?
Yep.
Malcolm Wild was sent from Chuck later. But anyway, that's how the church started.
Wow.
So it's like this hoodie. Last year was our 40 years, I guess that would be 83. Yeah.
Yeah. For those who are listening, he has an awesome hoodie.
Yeah.
Says 40 years on the front of it. Is that your logo?
That's the little Coastline logo.
That's cool. Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a lot to say for 40 years of history, but let me just bring us up to where we are. I currently serve the church as of September 2020 as the lead pastor, and my father asked me to come countless times, and I kept turning him down because he didn't really want to transition out of ministry, but recognized that the church needed to step into its next generation.
Yeah.
And one of the guys that trained me, John Corson, used to tell me, Neil, if you can find yourself in a church setting where 2 generations will live in the tension that comes from 2 generations, but not in a combative way, but in a collaborative way, you could find a healthy dynamic where God could do so many unique things.
Wow.
And so when I heard my dad say, Neil, I'd love for it, I was like, okay, John Corson's ringing in my ears. So this is what that means.
Now, gang?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. You see? Yeah, like that kind of thing. Anyway, I thought, all right, so this will look different. We talked to Fusco, we talked to Taylor, all these boys that transition, talked to a lot of people, and learned that there are things that must stay static in a transition. There's things that have to happen. And then there's things that are dynamic, things that are going to be unique to the roles and rhythms and responsibilities and relationships of each church. And so how we operate is a teaching team. And my dad is so gifted in teaching and evangelism. And he'd be the first to tell you he's not gifted with staff. And I don't know that I'm gifted, but I learned. Like, this is how we function in that capacity. And so our giftings collaborate. And that doesn't mean there's not tension. I mean, you still have an older and a younger, hey, what should we do? But here's the thing. Because we're related, we still have to do Thanksgiving together.
Yeah.
Still have to do, so you have to work it out.
Yeah.
Family. Nick, when it comes to
that.
generational stuff, I mean, we always hear about, all right, we need to be reaching this next generation. And a lot of the churches that are dying, the classic comment is, oh, yeah, it's just a lot of gray hairs. They're not reaching the next generation. So, I mean, what's your input? And you can ring in on this too, Neil, as to how can we, because it's not just church planners that are listening to this. There's guys that are pastoring, and that's the question we get a lot is, how can I get younger people in my church? Mm-hmm. And there's probably good methods and bad, but what would you say to that generational thing and the importance of it?
What I've found about the younger people, maybe it's generational, but I find that the current young people, they prioritize content over style. Mm-hmm. Wow. And I think that's counterintuitive, because I think that as you get older, you think that you have to change your style to reach the younger generation.
It's like Steve Buscemi, hey, fellow youth. He has the skateboard in school. Exactly. Have you seen that meme?
Yeah, I mean, I think we actually have a great model for it with Calvary Chapel, that we have Chuck Smith, who is the unhippest person.
Yep.
And didn't try. He didn't try to be hip. He didn't try to speak the language of the kids. Sometimes I did hear him say groovy a few times, like on old recordings. Yeah. But maybe that was something he said. I don't know. But I guess my point is that here's the thing that he did. He empowered young people. Yeah. And my pastor, who is Tom Stipe, he was one of those young people who got hooked up with Chuck, and then went and planted a church, reached a lot of young people, etc. But he always told me that the magic of Calvary Chapel, or the
special sauce,
the genius of Chuck Smith. That's actually the wording he used. The genius of Chuck Smith. A lot of people think it was just a verse by verse Bible teaching. He said that was good, but in his opinion, the genius was that Chuck truly believed in the work of God through regular people, and was willing to trust God and the Holy Spirit enough to empower young people. And so what you do is, if young people see this is a place where I'm going to be loved, but also they're going to empower me and encourage me and give me opportunities to serve, I think that is absolutely compelling. Yeah. Right. And I don't think young people want to just feel that just show up and,
be entertained.
Be entertained. Yeah, that's good.
I think they want to get their hands dirty, and I think they want to get involved. And actually, so I ended up taking over our young adults ministry last year because we had a leadership crisis in that ministry. And what I found as I took it over, I kind of had a powwow with the young adults in our group, and I asked, so what is important to you guys? What do you care about? And one person who's like a leader amongst them had said, look, we have free time, and we want to serve the Lord in ways that will change the world. And so I think that is, so content over style, and give them something to get their hands dirty.
When you took over the church, Neil, would you say that it was, what was the demographic of the congregation? First of all, approximately how many people are attending the church, and what was the demographic when you took over?
When I took over and then to where it is now? Okay. Mm-hmm.
As far as the generational thing specifically, not so much numbers. But,
so there were a lot of things that converged. 2020 is a year, So there's a lot of things that converged, even in our hometown. But I remember we showed up in 2019, and we looked around the room and didn't see a lot of people like us. And then things changed. And not so much me, but we started a school. And when you bring in young children, it's also a dynamic where families are around. Yeah. That changed something. But also, COVID happened. That changed things.
A few things.
And then Sally happened. Hurricane Sally hit our area. And it was the week that I stepped into leadership of the church. And so here's how I look at that. We had, 30, 40, 50,000 square feet of space that needed to go dormant for about 9 months to be reconstructed because it flooded. So here's what happened. The week I take over, Coastline Gulf Breeze, before Hurricane Sally and after Hurricane Sally, but also the same week that I step in as lead pastor. So God very graciously sent a storm, is the way I look at it, because what it did for me is it cleared the way ahead. Sure. And I think a lot of life is about perspective. You can look at that and go, look at these I looked at it as an opportunity. And the way I look at a problem is very simple. If there's a problem with Cece, my wife, her name is Cecilia, that's a problem. Everything else is Apollo Creed, is a mountain to climb, is a dragon to slay. That's a challenge. And so but if there's something in the home, that's a problem. That requires my attention. Everything else, okay, Lord, what are you doing? How can you? So I looked at it as this challenge. What do we do? So we restructured a few things and that kind of thing. And then we say it this way. The colonists started to show up. the natives were in Northwest Florida, but then all of a sudden, thanks to COVID and this, this governor that we had, people started moving. And it was just this convergence. And then there's multi-generational leadership. So it was like all these things at once started happening that some were in our control, some were not.
Yeah.
And now it is this beautiful balance of many generations. And because we're military, and because we're Southern, and because we're a tourist area, it's this strange convergence of culture where it reminds me a little bit of Santa Barbara and reminds me a little bit of other places. But it's Southern. And so it's like, I'm an hour from Alabama and like not far from Mississippi. And so that culture has a flavor to it that's different than Central or South Florida or Northeast or California. Southern, I don't know if you know who Jim Gaffigan is.
Yeah, comedian.
He said one thing about the South that I'll just say to end on this point. He goes, the reason the South will never rise again is because they're eating biscuits and gravy down there. Like those guys, you literally can't get it. They just so much hospitality, the food, the y'all, the yes sir, no ma'am.
Do you say y'all?
I don't say y'all.
Have you tried though? You gotta work into it.
I do. I say you got. My mom is from upstate New York.
Okay.
And so like there's
You
this
guys.
blend of like North and South in our family. But I don't, and maybe I have an accent. Connor Berry, he was a roommate of mine in Bible college. Yeah, you're Southern. I was like, oh, maybe I am. I don't.
You
know.
don't sound Southern to me.
But I don't sound as
No,
Southern
no.
as some of our people that live 30 minutes different from us. See, because the coast changes things.
It's different.
But you go 30 minutes north, and it's we may not have elk antlers everywhere, but we have deer antlers, fishing, hunting.
Yeah, fishing's
it's,
big in Florida. I didn't realize how big it was.
Yeah, wild Florida is part of our area. But I don't know if I
we got
answered your
alligators,
question.
Nick. There's all kinds of alligators.
I want
over
to see
there.
one so bad.
I saw one the other day. We're driving to the airport. They're just there.
It was my goal when I went to Florida this
Yeah.
last time we were in Bradenton to see an alligator. And so I was like asking Brian, where do I go? So I went to all the places. And then I'm pulling out of the parking lot. And this guy who was staying with us in the Airbnb, he went left and I went right. And he ran over an alligator.
He ran over one.
And I went right. I didn't even see one.
In our part of Florida, you see a lot of deer and a lot of bears. So because there's so much development in our area, black bears are everywhere.
Wow.
Like two Wednesdays ago, my wife and daughters and sons are pulling up, and I said, "Why aren't you coming in the house?" And they said, "There's 4 bears in our cul-de-sac." I'm like, "Oh, well, just give them a minute; they'll go away."
Yeah. Get the alligators.
Yeah, but that's wild Florida is a part of Northwest Florida.
Okay.
So it's different. Every place has got its own idiosyncrasies or whatever.
Yeah, Florida's an interesting place, and
It is,
we like a lot of things
You've lived
about
in
it.
a lot of places. So
We've lived in a lot of places,
Yeah.
and Florida is definitely up there with very interesting. But I was talking to Lynn the other day, my wife, and we're talking about how much we love the people, even compared to some of the other places that we've lived. There's a real I feel like there's a real genuineness. People may be at Walmart in their pajamas, but it's like they are who they are, kind of
They
thing.
don't care.
And it's like it's easy. I can work with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can work with that.
I mean, to be honest with you, these are $3 pajama pants from Walmart.
So you're Florida, yeah. You're a Florida man.
Yeah, I wear my pajamas. You just don't know. They don't look like pajamas, but they are.
Well, they
They're
actually
$3.
do. I was trying to say. No. I'm just joking. So what's the plan for the horizon? And how long was it that you took over the church?
So
or
September.
integrated in this role?
Yeah, September 19, 2020. So as we record this, we're in April of 24. So however long,
Hey, so you mentioned moving. You said your dad wanted you to come to
Yes,
Gulf Breeze,
yes.
but you were born in Gulf Breeze.
Yes.
So I think what I'd love to hear from you about, and this church planting podcast.
Okay.
Where did you go?
Okay.
And what did you do while you were there?
What were
I
you
think it
doing?
might have something to do with
So
church
I've
planting.
moved back to Gulf Breeze 3 times. So we'll cover this most recent comeback. Okay, how do I tell this story? 2006, was living in Oregon but before I left for Oregon, I called Britt because I lived in Santa Barbara for a while. I said, "Hey, Britt, what do you think about Reality Pensacola?" And he's like, "What do you mean?" I said, "I don't know, but I know that when I was with you in Reality, I just liked it. I don't know why I liked it. It's not really that much different than what Calvary is. And I don't even know what that means, but I would just love to pray about something with you in Pensacola. But I got to go hang out with John Corson for 3 months. And when I get back, there's 2 things I'm praying about. Do I work with my dad? Do I do something different? And what about this girl named Cece?" So that was why I was there. Anyway, while I'm in Oregon, just this dynamic of my dad had this idea of just keep building bigger on one campus. And I thought, man, there's so many, we have no Calvaries around us. What if we were just able to go to them, And so that gem or seed of an idea was there in like 2006. 2008, we have these people from Destin, Florida, calling us in Gulf Breeze, about an hour apart from each other. Said, hey, we would love to see a Calvary Chapel here. So my dad sends like whatever he can, resources, even finds a pastor to go. And then the pastor died about 6 months later. He was an older guy, had some health problems. And so they call again. Hey, we're right back where we started. We got chairs now. We got audio.
Hey, remember that pastor you sent us?
Yeah, he didn't make it, man. So anyway, by 2009, I had gotten what my responsibilities pretty much stewarded by others. And so I said, Dad, I could go down with those 8 people and just lead like 4 chords for the Lord. And they were streaming our services at that point.
It's a requirement.
Yeah. You got to know your 4. Open the eyes, my heart, that kind of stuff. But they were streaming our services not by our request or desire, but what are you going to do? And so like I said, let's just go down. So I go down there. And about a month later, I'm like, man, we did not do the stream well. We weren't set up for it. I said, Dad, I'm not the best Bible teacher in the world, but let me just teach through the Gospel of John and lead worship down there. We'll just see what happens. Well, at that time, Maranatha, we had known Phil Wickham for like the longest time. And Phil would come and do all of our Easters and all these events.
Did you go to Bible college with him?
No. I went the year before Jeremy Camp was there. It was right around the same time Worship Generation happened and all that.
Okay.
But Phil was doing our Easter Sunday morning in Pensacola. So I said, Phil, would you be willing to do Easter Sunday night in Destin? He said no. And I said, well, why not? Well, I've never done an outdoor venue.
We'll give you $30,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
But he said, I said, well, why not do it? He goes, well, I've never done outdoor. I was like, well, it's kind of like indoor, but it's just different. And so he ended up coming for $2,000. He did it Sunday evening.
Nice.
And we used that as a platform just to communicate to the community, hey, we're going to start a Calvary. So I drove from Gulf Breeze to Destin every Tuesday night for small group, every Thursday for office hours, and every Sunday for 3 years. From 2010 to November of 12. The reason, we had bought our first home in 2009 of November under President Obama's first-time homebuyer tax credit.
Yeah.
You couldn't sell or rent the home for 3 years. So for 3 years, I drove the Fred Flintstone 1979 F-100. What I mean by that is, it had no floor.
That's a cool truck.
It was a cool
Except
truck,
it
but
doesn't
the
have a
floor was
yeah.
rusted. So I could see my feet, and I had a plate over it, but it's like, if you move the plate, you're literally looking down. So I did that for 3 years. And then when we could sell the house, it sold as we were putting the sign in the yard, and we moved to Destin 30 days later. And I pastored and planted that world for 7 years living there. And we planted 2 other churches. One's called Gathering, Fort Walton Beach. One's called Redeemer 30A, and then other churches. But that all happened out of a very negative reason. The reason those 8 people were asking us, can you come help, is they were attending a church in Fort Walton Beach, which is like Gulf Breeze, Fort Walton, Destin. And they said, hey, we just feel like the pastor, something's off. And I'm a pastor's kid. So when I hear someone say that, he probably told you no, or, like you just don't like him. No, we think he's teaching polygamy. Polygamy in Northwest Florida in the 2000s? No, we don't believe that.
How far were you from Alabama?
Yeah, that's right, But long story short, and I won't take time, because this takes a long time to discuss, you can go online and check out the YouTube Cold Case Files, James Flanders.
Dun, dun, dun.
Dun, dun, dun. And long story short, this pastor disassociated from the Calvary movement, changed his name to Calvary Emerald Coast, secretly had begun a polygamous relationship with his wife and another woman named Lori Kaysen. Out of that dynamic, he fathered a child with Lori, named her Grace, because his theology was Grace is a license to do.
To do polygamy?
Yeah. And he's, David and all these people. And
just a disclaimer for the Cultivate church planning program: we do not have a polygamy,
no, there's no
component to the
polygamy
training.
Let me see if I can. Let me try and summarize some very crazy details and a lot more stories. You need to watch this special, but. There was a suicide note that surfaced. Lori's missing, The child's around Grace. Pastor had scratch marks all over his neck. So she went crazy on me and left. And now I feel called to go back to Arizona. So he left the church in shambles. And then the family of Lori.
This is the church you came in to
This was
pastor?
the church that asked people from this church, can you come to They were attending Fort Walton. Yep.
Okay.
So here's what happens, and this is why I'm trying to share this. eventually through that special cold case file, there was enough circumstantial evidence to bring James back to the state of Florida for trial.
It was because of the show.
Because of the show.
Amazing.
They used it. Yeah. The family just stayed persistent. That we do not believe she committed suicide.
Yeah.
So there was enough circumstantial evidence once people that knew how to dig started to dig. And so here's what he said. If I tell you where I buried her, can I get a plea bargain for manslaughter? So he did that. He buried her in his backyard. He's currently serving a term that he's about to finish. And so here's what my point was. So to plant a church in Destin, we're just trying to help. And then all of a sudden you realize, like, well, people are like dying down here for lack of collaboration in some ways, for lack of cohesion of unity and vision and heart for the area. And I don't have any influence over Calvary Chapel. I don't really want any. But in that area where it's home, I never wanted to see Calvary Chapel bruised and hurt and branded like that again. Because when it all happened, here's what the headline wrote. Or said, local Calvary Chapel pastor commits murder. So who's the only Calvary Chapel pastor in the area? And so I kept saying, I'm not that guy. I wouldn't be talking to you. Murderer! But here's the deal. If I hung the dove anywhere, might as well have been the devil. Because everyone saw Calvary Chapel
about a stigma,
as a bad thing. So it wasn't the only reason we named our church Coastline, but it was a reason. Because it was like, this isn't helpful. We need to have another way to say who we are. And we come from a healthy church. Like we've been around for 30-something, 40-something years at that point. So that was the negative impetus for and it's really, some people ask, why do you care so much about the Gulf Coast? That's why. Because now that's an extreme example. But I've also know what it's like to live with ghosts. And what I mean by that is where the person is still alive, but the relationship isn't. And sometimes that's due to poor infrastructure, poor communication, poor commitment to one another. Not always. Sometimes 1 Timothy 3, you got to let some people go. But I do think a lot happens in church where church is like, you've heard this, the bowl of cereal, it's full of fruits, flakes, and nuts, the church, And that's true. But I'm going to say something that sounds odd, but it helps me remember it. Everybody has value, dignity, and worth because they're created in the image of God. And if you can't show someone respect just because of that nature, I think you're wrong. And so this is what I say. Everybody is flawed and odd, but if you can't give them a nod, you're wrong. And so what I think about that is it's called fong, flawed, odd, nod, God. Give everybody a nod. Why? Everyone is flawed and odd, but give them a nod because they're loved by God. So if you can't fong, you're in the wrong. And so in my situation, I had to become friends with the Anglicans, the Episcopalians, the Methodists, the Baptists. There's no Calvary Chapel in my area. And the one that was there, they're killing people. Right. And so I had to learn, hey, wait a second. What is the difference between difference of opinion, theological error, and heresy? And let us not paint with a broad brush every time we disagree and say, that guy, maybe there's just a difference of opinion. Maybe there is theological error, but that doesn't mean we can't be. Yeah. But then there's heresy. And so I do think in my situation what are we doing now? Now with Coastline Calvary Chapel, there's 9 churches that I would identify, or 8 churches that would identify as Calvary Chapel, from Mobile, Alabama to Panama City, Florida, that are not all from us. Some of them are people moving, but we're talking, we're collaborating.
You're flonging.
Yeah, exactly. We are working together to just be together, And so that's kind of where I feel very passionate about. I love what CCA is doing. I love what CGN's doing. I love what the Methodists are doing, the Baptist, whoever the person is. But I feel just very focused on hey, Northwest and SEAL team, Southeast Alabama, and then Mississippi. These are areas where a lot of people go, is that a place? I go, well, actually, the South Coast is a coast that everyone forgets about. There's the East Coast and West Coast, even of Florida. People are like, which coast? I'm there's also a South Coast. Which I know my buddy Billy would disagree with me with this because he's from St. Augustine. But Pensacola is credited as America's first settlement. And there's a cross on Pensacola Beach from September of 1559 where one of the first religious services in America was held to, for, and about Jesus. It was a Catholic Mass. And so I always wonder, in Pensacola, you had the Toronto blessing. You have Pensacola Christian, which is like very, very, kind of straight-laced. What would happen if God were to pour out his Spirit and there was this empowering of leaders and a little bit of like strategy and structure and vision, mission, and values to see a move of God's Spirit, have it stay and not be attached to a name, but a bunch of names.
Coming back to the generational thing too, I think that's another key draw for the young people is the unity within the church, because they see the division, they see the attack, they see one side attacking the other over stupid stuff, and that's a real turnoff. I mean, it's like people are tired of division in the nation, in the world, in the nation, and then in the church. And I think, a lot of guys who are saying, we want the young people, but then they turn around and talk bad about the church down the street.
I think like we have this in common at least, CBS. We were all in this room conceived, born, and shaped. And so you're shaped by the family you're born into, the culture that's around you, and the stories that you're sold. Everyone is. And this is what I think. A lot of times, like guys that have good intentions, I want to protect the church, or I want to make sure but they don't may necessarily see it in these categories. Like maybe that guy just has a difference of opinion. It's not like right or wrong. It's just maybe that is theological error. That's not heresy. It's just error. You can, and then maybe some things are heresy. So who is it? Guzik? Like God doesn't necessarily get a lot of glory from an ignorant ministry. Like it's not like I'm ignorant, so therefore God is more glorified. I don't know about that. I think the more you learn, the more useful you are. So like just after the cradle to just before the coffin, be a lifelong learner, because when you're done learning, you're done. And so I feel like it's a bummer, but unity. Like, I think you hit it on the head with that it is a turnoff to people that I know at the surf shop to see Christians bickering over things that they don't even understand. Like, what are you guys fighting about? Like, thought Jesus died for you,
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense.
We planted a church in Hungary, and we experienced something similar to what you're saying, like with needing to understand the difference between opinion, even theological. I think that's a really good distinction you made.
It is,
That it's not just opinion or heresy.
Right.
There might also be such a thing as theological error, which is not intentional.
Right.
And so, understanding those differences and understanding, okay, what does that mean then for my relationships with these people, both as friends and perhaps as partners, and the partnership will be determined, or at least let's say the breadth of the partnership will be determined by some of those theological factors. We experienced that a lot because, I was in a town that was like 90-something%, Roman Catholic, but most of those Roman Catholics were also atheists, and so...
It was a cultural thing.
Yeah, and so for us, it was like there were two other churches in town, and we differed on some things, but they were Protestant churches, we were Protestant church, and we were like, hey, let's at least be friends, because I'd love to have some Christian friends.
That's right.
And some of those relationships have blossomed into partnerships and things like that. I mean, Brian, you were a missionary.
Yeah.
Did you have experiences like that?
Yeah, totally. And I think on the mission field is where you do value those relationships even more, because you almost feel outnumbered as far as you go into a community that's unchristian, or that you're trying to reach, and as much help and camaraderie as you can get, you want. And we did that in Bellingham too, up in Northwest Washington. It was very unchristian, and they had a pastors meeting of like over 100 pastors. We just did an episode with J.J. Johnson about that meeting was so powerful for the churches to get together and pray for each other with no agenda, just, I think the issue is we just have our petty things that we kind of think these are the big issues. If you don't agree with me on this, then we can't do this together. But rather than focusing on what do we have in common, what goal are we trying to achieve?
Yeah, and viewing other Christian churches that maybe the differences are small as like competitors in some way.
Competitors, yeah. Well, a lot of it comes back to insecurity and pride. That's my opinion.
I agree with that.
It's like these guys. We struggle with it. I mean, if we're all honest, it's like we have insecurities. We want our church to be the best church and the one that people choose over the other churches. But in the big grand plan, our Father, who is in heaven, he has a desire for his kingdom that we're all working in. So we have to get on board, or we're not lined up with what he wants to do.
That kind of clarity is what provides momentum. Like, who is it? Rayner, who wrote Simple Church based on those 4 pillars of like clarity, momentum, alignment, and focus. Like, when you have clarity, that's when momentum starts. And then it's your job to align it and focus it in order to yield results. And so I think that kind of clarity is, well, what am I here to build? The church? Yeah. But what's the church built? The kingdom of God. You know, which like, so like when I'm here to realize like, I'm here to see the kingdom of God thrive. And so I think that kind of clarity like provides me with like, all right, now I know what to do. Now I got some momentum. Now I can focus it. Now I can align it. And then I don't have to be so salty about this guy or that guy.
Yeah. You just focus on what you're called to do.
You know what helps with that though is travel. Like when you travel, when you get out of your zip code, you realize, man, nobody knows. No one's ever heard of Gulf Breeze. How could that be?
I've arrived. Who are you?
Yeah, how could you
I'm Neil Spencer.
How could you not know who Yancey Spencer is? Like, he has a statue. Like
photos one at a time, please.
Exactly. But man, travel I think is a wonderful thing. Like I would just encourage that as much as possible to like expose yourself to different cultures. All those things. Like
get the big picture.
Yeah, it
in
really
more
helps.
ways than one. Just in the church, in the world, it's like, hey, we've got a job to do.
Yeah, and then to like learn. Like you're like, oh gosh, there were other generations before me. Like to come here, I had to fly through Atlanta, and then their terminal Atlanta shows you the history of like the decades, and you're like, look at all these people that came before us. Maybe I don't know, or maybe I'm not as important.
The guy that invented Coke.
Yeah, Coca-Cola.
Neil, it's thanks for sharing your story with us.
Yeah, man.
It's been awesome.
Thank you for the opportunity.
I appreciate you. Appreciate your dad, John. Give our love to him and to the church there. Praying for you guys. And let's get together in Florida sometime.
Yeah.
Although we live, how far away are we? Like,
so I'm about 8 hours from Orlando. So how far are you from Orlando?
Yeah, so we're west of Orlando, so probably similar 8 or 9 hours.
See, because of that panhandle. Like the panhandle goes about 6 hours from east to west.
We get some of the same hurricanes you get, though.
Yes, that's true. That is true. Yeah, so we got that in common.
Thanks again for sharing with us. Nick, any last words you want to share?
Well, I love the fact that you were planting churches. You're still involved in planting churches, but you also successfully transitioned to church.
Yes, exactly.
I don't hear a lot of great stories about that. And so praise the Lord for that. And I love that you guys have a heart for reaching that area with church plants. So
yeah, and if I could say one last thing about that, like what I enjoy is to work. That's what I like. Like I have other relatives that like to have fun, and I think fruitfulness is like fun, like to me. And so like what I would say about the transition is like it's God's grace for sure, and a heck of a lot of work, a heck of a lot of research,
hard work,
intentionality,
hard work, folks.
Yeah, let me share this last thing before I'll just go. Is this? My dad tells this funny joke about the farmer, and the farmer, has this phenomenal farm. The rows are all good, fruit's going everywhere. And some guy comes up to the farmer and goes, man, look at all that God has blessed you with. And he goes, oh, God's so good. You should have seen what he was doing with the field before I showed up. And it was just this point that, yes, God brings the increase, but not outside of partnership with you, giving your very best, but also ultimately trusting him. But it's just this weird interplay. Like God will never do your part for you. And I do think that work was in the garden before sin was. And so I don't know that work is all that
That's
bad.
a good point.
Agree.
But in balance, rest, recovery. So yeah, I just wanted to share that as it's grace and work.
Amen. All right. Thanks again, Neil, for joining us. Great having you. Thanks, Nick, as always, for being with us on the show. And we'll talk to you guys soon.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening. The Cultivate Church Planting Podcast is part of CGN Media, a podcast network that points to Christ. Check out cgnmedia.org for more great shows and ways to support the ministry.